Makoto had always been fascinated with girly clothes and stuff since he was a kid, to the point that he'd even dress up as a girl at school. On the other hand, Saki is an energetic freshman who falls for Makoto at first sight, and it doesn't matter to her that he's a cross-dresser. Then comes Ryuji, Makoto's best friend, who starts having feelings towards his friend. What does the future hold for this trio? Hi guys. Once again, we're back with another fascinating anime that will touch your hearts. We really appreciate all your support, and it encourages us to make more videos for you. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you still haven't, so you'll get notified of our future videos. Stay tuned and enjoy. Our story starts in a classroom one gloomy afternoon. A girl is holding a letter asking her to meet in the classroom after school, although it seems like it is already way past the meeting time. Makoto is just about to leave when a young girl suddenly comes running into the room and apologizes for being late. Her name is Aoi, and she is also part of the student board, like Makoto and the one who sent the letter. She didn't waste time and immediately told Makoto the reason why she asked to meet him. With so much energy not often seen in love confession scenes like this, Aoi exclaimed her feelings for Makoto and asked for them to start dating. Makoto couldn't believe it, more so when Aoi admitted that she just liked everything about her. That, and the fact that Aoi actually likes girls. Aoi knew that Makoto might feel uncomfortable being confessed to by a girl, but she just didn't want to regret not having done anything, so she had to tell her. But it seemed that things wouldn't go the way Aoi wanted. Makoto suddenly starts taking off her blouse and wig, revealing that she is actually a he and not a she. Makoto was feeling guilty at first for leading Aoi, but to his surprise, his junior actually liked this better. As it turns out, Aoi swings both ways, and she's just over the moon knowing that. Makoto is an actual Otokonoko, which means she can spend time with both the boy and girl versions of him. Unfortunately, even though she's okay with Makoto being an Otokonoko, it doesn't mean that they can start going out. Makoto confesses that he doesn't believe he'll ever start having feelings for her, even when they do date. But Aoi is not one to easily give up, and so she declares that she'll do everything she can to make Makoto fall for her. The next day, Makoto was still thinking about Aoi's confession. Although he regretted it a bit, he also knows that it's for the best, especially since others had not been kind to someone like him, and he doesn't want her to suffer. But just like Aoi declared that afternoon, she persistently pursued Makoto, looking for him and wanting to talk to him. Makoto, however, would hide from her every time. That is until she finally caught him off guard and approached him during his PE class. Makoto then tells her that although the first years didn't know about him being a crossdresser, the higher levels knew, and it would look bad on her if she's seen associating with him. This made Aoi sad, not because of how others might view her, but because she thought that him being an Otokonoko is their dirty little secret. Makoto started laughing and told Aoi that she's weird, but even so she didn't mind, which just proves that Aoi is someone who doesn't care about what others think of her and just does whatever she feels right. Later that day, Aoi gives Makoto a pink hanky in exchange for the hanky he gave her the day before. As much as he wants it, though he remembers her mom telling him when he was young that he can't have girly stuff. Fortunately, Aoi isn't like her mom. Meanwhile, someone is seen spying on the two whose identity is later revealed to be Makoto's childhood friend Ryuji. He believes that Aoi is up to no good and is openly calling out to her to leave Makoto alone. This is not because he's just a meanie, but because Makoto has had experiences like this before, which ended up to be just a prank. The misunderstanding was later resolved, although it caused Aoi to embarrass herself in front of Makoto. All's well that ends well. Despite the mishaps, Aoi managed to befriend Ryuji after she picked up the student handbook he dropped, and in it was a picture of a sleeping Makoto's, if you call blackmailing befriending, that is. The next day, Ryuji gave Aoi 3 photos of a younger Makoto in exchange for her keeping her mouth shut about the picture in his handbook. Aoi teased Ryuji about having a crush on Makoto, which he vehemently denied. Aoi suddenly saw Makoto from afar and tried to call out to him, but Ryuji stopped her. He then told her that although Makoto dresses up as a girl, he doesn't really want to stand out. That's why, if she keeps on acting like she did, then she'll just become a burden to him. Now that Aoi finally understands where Ryuji's protectiveness is coming from, she sees him in a new light and even calls him her master. After all, he knows a lot about Makoto from over the years that they have been friends. Later in the day during class, Makoto was thinking about Aoi and how she's already befriended Ryuji. Suddenly, Aoi called out to him from outside, although she was shortly after scolded by her teacher. Aoi soon after remembered Ryuji telling her not to approach Makoto in front of others, and only talk to him during lunch. The next day, Makoto and Ryuji were having lunch at the rooftop. Suddenly, Aoi appears and complains that they went to have lunch without inviting her. Ryuji was just impressed that she managed to find them there. Anyways, Aoi is a pretty crafty girl, using the excuse that the summer break was about to begin and they wouldn't be able to see each other for quite a while. She asked for Makoto's line address so they could still chat. Although reluctant at first, Makoto eventually agreed after Ryuji convinced him. By the end of the day, Aoi wanted to go home with Makoto together since it was the last day of school, although she got rejected. Fortunately, Ryuji felt bad for her, so he gave her Makoto's notebook and asked her to return it to him so she has an excuse to go to Makoto's house. Meanwhile, Makoto was welcomed home by his mother. As it turns out, his mother doesn't know that he dresses up as a girl at school, and that's why he tries his best to act as boyishly as he can when he's with her at home. Later in the evening, the doorbell suddenly ding-donged, and Makoto was asked to get it, just as much because the visitor was actually Aoi on the errand that Ryuji had sent her to do. Aoi was very much welcomed by Makoto's mother, who thought at first that she was his girlfriend. Before his mother could start telling embarrassing stuff to Aoi, though Makoto managed to convince her that it was about time for Aoi to get home, and even volunteered to walk her back. The two eventually stopped at a park, where Makoto confessed to Aoi that his mother doesn't know about him being a crossdresser, and he wants to keep it that way. Not long after, Ryuji suddenly appeared with a bunch of fireworks for them to play with. When they were down to the last 3 sparklers, Aoi asked if it was possible for them to meet again outside of school, and the two agreed. Their first get-together was at a public pool where not only Aoi, but also Ryuji were exposed to a less conservative version of Makoto. A couple of weeks later, they met at Wadenold's, where Aoi brought them some souvenirs from her trip to the Galapagos Islands. The summer break was almost over by then, and Makoto was looking forward to it, especially since that means the founding party is upon them as well. It's a fancy party where everyone wears dresses and suits and fancy food is served. Makoto wasn't able to attend the previous year because he got sick, and that's why he's so excited about it this year. This is going to be the first time that Makoto will be able to wear a dress, or any girly clothes for that matter that aren't a school uniform. As expected, it wasn't just him, but also Aoi and Ryuji looked forward to seeing it. Speaking of Aoi, she suddenly suggested that they go shopping together for dresses. Makoto was reluctant at first, but with Ryuji's assurance to have his back and Aoi's instigation for anything cute pilgrimage, he eventually agreed. On the day of their agreed-upon get-together, Makoto did his best to choose clothes that would pass as a girl along with his wig. Although he had reservations at first, after some rando suddenly came up to him and invited him to go to a cafe. Thinking he was a girl, Makoto was just so happy. Makoto excitedly met up with Aoi and Ryuji, who very much appreciated his OOTD. The trio's first stop was a dress shop where Makoto and Aoi excitedly chose dresses to try on. As for Ryuji, he just doesn't understand the difference between dresses and feels so out of place. Next stop was an ice cream shop that sells cute animal-inspired ice creams. By this time, Ryuji almost couldn't contain himself. He just couldn't help getting excited seeing Makoto like this. Finally, they went shopping for shoes, and Makoto decided to go with red high heels. He had a hard time even just standing with them at first, but his enthusiasm to wear it got the better of him. It was almost sunset when they finally decided to go home and promised to do something like this again in the future. But see, the world is round, and what goes up must come down. It seems like Makoto had spent all his good fortune that day, since the scene he saw once he got home might just convince him to make drastic changes in his everyday life. As it so happens, his mother came upon the hanky that Aoi gave him, and thought that Makoto had reverted back to his childhood years, where he was so interested in cute and girly things. Fortunately, he was able to play it cool and convince his mother that it was Aoi's, and that he just forgot to give it back to her after borrowing it. Going back to memory lane, Makoto's mother had never been supportive of him liking girly stuff to the point that she had a breakdown after she found out he was collecting girly stuff and was even trying out a skirt. She rejected him and refused to listen to him. Fortunately, Makoto's dad was more receptive. He calmly asks Makoto if he wants to become a girl, and when Makoto said that he doesn't know, he decided to enroll him in a school where Makoto will be allowed to wear girl clothes, although they will have to hide this from his mom. Back to the present. Seeing his mother like this, Makoto decided that he should stop doing it and just live like how his mother would like. Everyone at school was making a fuss seeing Makoto out of his girl uniforms. Even Ryuji and Aoi were surprised. Although Ryuji was calmer and supported Makoto in his decision, Aoi wasn't. Despite Makoto telling them that this was what he really wanted to do, Aoi is not convinced at all. She got so upset that she refused to talk to Makoto until he started being honest with his feelings. Meanwhile, Makoto started becoming popular with his classmates and schoolmates. His teachers also started to rely on him more. Everything was going great, except for the fact that Aoi still refused to talk to him. After a week went by, Aoi suddenly asked Makoto to go home together. That doesn't mean that she's given up on her opinion about Makoto's decision, though. They got into a little argument until Makoto suddenly asked Aoi to be his girlfriend. Even though this was what Aoi had wanted to happen all this time, his words made her so upset that she once again walked out on him. Another week went by, and Ryuji couldn't take it anymore, so he went out of his way to convince Aoi to make up with Makoto. But she's just too stubborn for her own good, and there's no convincing her at all. Makoto, on the other hand, had decided to throw away all his girly stuff for good and even tore down the dress he bought for the party. It was hurting him, but he knew this had to be done. Not long after, it was finally the night of the founding party. Ryuji and Aoi were having a blast eating all the served fancy food, being the foodie that they are. As for Makoto, he was talking to a female classmate who had decided to wear a wig for the event, and for a while, their Makoto almost had a relapse but managed to hold himself back. That is until he was left on his own and thought over the things that really mattered to him. Back to Ryuji and Aoi. They've decided to take a rest from eating and went out of the gym where the party was being held. Suddenly, Aoi saw one of the garbage collectors holding a plastic bag with Makoto's red heels. Without even explaining anything to Ryuji, Aoi started running after the garbage truck, fully determined to take back the shoes she knew was precious to Makoto. And what of Makoto, you ask? After he suddenly borrowed his classmate's wig, Makoto went to the bathroom and tried it on. Although he found himself looking ridiculous with long hair while wearing a suit, it doesn't really matter since this is who he truly is. Makoto then went looking for Aoi. After Ryuji told him that she came running after a garbage truck, Makoto followed suit without explaining anything to Ryuji as well, who was surprised to see him wearing a wig. Aoi's senpai eventually found her walking by the shore, and to get her attention, he suddenly shouted all the things that Aoi had been wanting him to say for the past 2 weeks. Of how he actually likes cute stuff, and that he prefers to wear the girls' blazer rather than the boys'. He admitted that he had wanted to deny himself of what he truly wants, but just like how Aoi hadn't given up on him, he also doesn't want to give up on himself. Finally, they had made up, and as some sort of reward for his honesty, Aoi gave him the heels which he had fortunately managed to retrieve from the garbage truck. Aoi then made Makoto wear the heels, and even offered her own dress to complete the outfit. In return, Makoto gave her his suit, and the two of them spent a memorable time dancing with each other. The next day, everyone was once again back to making a fuss after seeing Makoto back to dressing up as a girl. Although it doesn't seem like everything will just go back to the way it was, some of the friends that Makoto had made when he was dressed up as a boy had decided to stay. Meanwhile, Ryuji seems to slowly come to terms with the feelings he might actually have for Makoto. He is conflicted, however, and was thinking that perhaps just like Makoto, he too has to change. One day at lunch, the trio were talking about what they do on the upcoming short break. Ryuji suggested that they go to the aquarium, which everyone enthusiastically agreed to. On the agreed-upon date, Makoto came while wearing a dress which he secretly bought. It earned approval from both Ryuji and Aoi, although the latter was more expressive. And so the three spent a good amount of their day walking around the aquarium and enjoying the marine life in it. Although the trip had to be cut short when Makoto suddenly noticed a couple of ladies from their neighborhood. Fortunately, he had reliable friends who always had his back. As Aoi baited herself to distract Makoto's neighbors, Ryuji took Makoto's hand and carefully left the facility. Once they were safely out, Makoto pointed out to Ryuji how it's been a while since the two of them had held hands together, which in turn made Ryuji suddenly feel conscious. Before their trip ended, Makoto presented Ryuji and Aoi with souvenirs he specially chose for them, although Aoi was acting sus after receiving hers. Once the break was over, and it was back to reality, that is school. Aoi was in the dumps when she found out that she failed the tests on 2 of her subjects. She sought the help of her senpais who agreed to help her. It fell to Ryuji, the one mainly responsible, in teaching Aoi, seeing as not only is he the smartest of the 3, but also because Makoto is busy helping out in club activities. But Ryuji doesn't seem like he's cut out for teaching at all. The study session he and Aoi were having at the library just isn't going anywhere. Shortly after, Makoto finally arrived, and Ryuji offered to do a study camp over the weekend at their house. More than Aoi agreeing, Ryuji was more conscious of Makoto's decision to join them. Fortunately, he too was excited about it. And so the weekend came. Ryuji's little sister Konatsu also welcomed them to their house. She seemed pretty close to Makoto and has also taken a liking to Aoi, in a way. After spending a good part of the day studying, Aoi was finally certain that the problem in their previous tutoring sessions was Ryuji's Spartan way of teaching, unlike Makoto's. Unfortunately, there's no way that one can be good at everything. While Ryuji seems to be gifted at cooking, Makoto isn't. But that doesn't really matter since Aoi declares she'll eat whatever it is that Makoto makes. By the time they were about to sleep, Konatsu bids goodbye after scaring Makoto with one of her horror stories. By the time they were about to go home the following day, Makoto and Ryuji found out that Aoi was actually living alone with her grandma, while his father is always away doing research on whales. That said, Aoi thanks her senpais for their help and assures them that she'll ace her makeup tests, although Ryuji had his doubts. Speaking of doubts, for a while now, Ryuji had caught Aoi acting sus around Makoto on certain occasions, and adding the suspicions that Konatsu raised about whether Aoi really has a thing for Makoto or not. Ryuji couldn't help but feel that something fishy is at play. Not long after Aoi arrives at their house and her grandma welcomes her home, they paid their respects to her grandpa and chatted a bit about her weekend trip with Makoto and Ryuji. Later that evening, as Aoi was about to go to sleep, she seems to be having conflicting thoughts about her feelings for Makoto. Oh no. Just what could this mean? Was Ryuji's suspicions of Aoi right all along? Were the feelings she claims to have all a bluff? Are you guys still tuning in? I hope you are. And while you're at it, please like and subscribe to our channel. Pretty please. Aoi and Ryuji were showing their support to Makoto as they spent their weekend coming to watch his practice with the basketball team. He was so good that the regular members invited him to join their club. Back to Aoi and Ryuji, the older boy finally got the courage to ask Aoi about her real feelings for Makoto. She tried to avoid answering by asking Ryuji the same thing, prompting him to finally admit that he really loves Makoto. Aoi started crying as she admitted that she really wanted to be in love with Makoto, but for some reason she was not. She felt frustrated that she couldn't have the same feelings as Ryuji did. When Aoi suddenly ran away from the gym, Ryuji chased after her and gave her a pep talk. He then told her to calm down before going back. Not long after, Aoi returned and apologized to Ryuji for her behavior. When Makoto sees them talking and notices how close they seem to have gotten, he suddenly gets the idea that Aoi has changed her feelings for him, and that she's now dating Ryuji. Later in the afternoon after Aoi went home, Makoto asked Ryuji if he liked anyone at the moment. The very conscious Ryuji in return asked Makoto if he likes Aoi, still believing that Ryuji and Aoi were a thing, denied liking her in a romantic way, and even encouraged Ryuji to go after her. Ryuji, of course, vehemently denies this, although he did eventually confirm that he likes someone, and Makoto knows that person really well. Since his friend didn't exactly tell him who it was, Makoto just became more curious as to who this person is that Ryuji's fancies. The next day, with the season changing, it's not ideal to eat lunch by the rooftop anymore, and so they decided to use some empty room downstairs instead. Makoto was lost in thought as he realized just how close Ryuji and Aoi had become. And although Ryuji told him that he doesn't have feelings for Aoi, the same thing can't be said for Aoi. To somehow clear his mind, Makoto volunteered to ask permission for them to use an empty room. As he did, Ryuji and Aoi were left on their own. This time Ryuji asked Aoi why she isn't as expressive around Makoto as she used to be. Aoi told him that she had decided to give up on Makoto once she realized that her feelings for him couldn't compare to how Ryuji does. Instead, she assured him that she'll do her best to support the two of them. The following day, Ryuji caught the cold, so he was absent from school, which means that it'll just be Aoi and Makoto eating lunch that day. Makoto felt a bit awkward since it's been a while since they've been on their own. Feeling awkward, however, seems to be the least of his concerns. Aoi told Makoto that she's now decided to start eating lunch with her friends instead of hanging out with him and Ryuji. She also admitted that she's now giving up on trying to be with him, although she did still hope for them to stay friends. Although he didn't press. Makoto is clearly upset with Aoi's decision. Once Ryuji had fully recovered and was back at school, one of his classmates handed him a questionnaire about what they wanted to do for their future. By lunchtime that day, as Aoi declared the day before, she stopped eating lunch with her seniors. With only Ryuji and Makoto left, the latter found it necessary to make it clear that he really doesn't have a thing for Aoi. In return, Makoto told him how Aoi had confessed that she's not into him anymore, and that's why he thought that it was because Ryuji and Aoi were together. The two then eventually started talking about the career planning questionnaire they received. Ryuji suddenly felt upset, realizing that he and Makoto may just have about a year left to hang out like this since their future plans might not align and they can't be together anymore. The following day, Makoto was approached by one of the basketball members and was asked if he'd already decided whether he'd join the club or not. As Makoto was on his way home, he was conflicted about the decisions he had to make regarding his future plans and whether he should join the basketball team. Suddenly, he noticed Aoi near some bushes and went over to her side when she called out to him. After a while, Makoto told Aoi about his dilemma with regards to joining the basketball club or not. Aoi in return asked him if there is really a need for him to choose. That's to say, if Makoto was conflicted on committing to something, then instead of joining the club, he should just join them whenever he felt like playing basketball. Makoto tells his classmate, who was in the basketball club, about his decision the next day. The classmate surprisingly accepted his decision without a fuss, although he did make him promise to be some sort of reserve player for the team, which Makoto happily accepted. As for Ryuji, he was in his classroom still conflicted on what to put on his career planning questionnaire. He made his decision, however, after he overhears some classmates talking about confessing to their crush who is supposed to graduate soon. That evening, Ryuji, Makoto, and Aoi were watching the same movie in their respective houses, but had different levels of empathy towards the characters, seeing as they're facing different dilemmas. While Ryuji was conflicted on whether he should be confessing to Makoto or not, his best friend has almost made his mind, not to choose between wanting to become just a boy or just a girl. As for Aoi, she watched the movie without having any particular emotions. Not long after, it was about time for the school festival and the students spent weeks preparing for it. Makoto's class was doing a takoyaki stand, while Aoi's is a haunted house. As for Ryuji, he seemed to have kept it a secret, and even insisted that they don't visit when Aoi went to ask him about it. The day of the festival came. Aoi went to hang out with Makoto, and the two of them decided to visit Ryuji's class together. Turns out, Ryuji's class was doing a maid cafe, and the twist. Makoto was just about to leave when a problem suddenly occurred. It seems like one of Ryuji's classmates that was supposed to be one of the maids couldn't make it, so now they're short on staff. When Ryuji heard about it, he volunteered Makoto as a replacement. Later in the evening, the campfire was about to start, although Makoto had decided not to participate since he wanted to wear the maid outfit a little longer, so of course Ryuji also decided not to. Shortly after Makoto was about to hand Ryuji his uniform so he could change, when Ryuji's student handbook suddenly fell and Makoto's picture in it was laid in the open. We now go back to memory lane during Ryuji and Makoto's childhood. Even back then, Ryuji had already unconsciously fallen for Makoto, but fearing that he'll get teased or punished for doing something that isn't what is considered normal by most, Ryuji decided to hide it. At some point, the two of them eventually started getting estranged. Years later, the two of them reunited in high school. Ryuji was so surprised when he saw Makoto in a girl's uniform. At that time, Ryuji felt himself wanting to be close again with Makoto, but continued to distance himself as he continued to fear having his feelings being exposed. All these changed when the students started ostracizing Makoto for being a crossdresser and even made fun of him. This led to Ryuji getting into a fight with a classmate and eventually renewing his friendship with Makoto for good. Back to the present, Ryuji tried to make an excuse as he covered the picture in his student handbook, although it seems like it wasn't necessary since Makoto didn't see what was in it, at least according to how Makoto acted that night. However, that wasn't actually the case, and for some reason Makoto blames himself for it. Ever since then, however, Makoto had become more conscious about Ryuji and what he might actually feel for him. It wasn't long before Ryuji realized that Makoto did see the picture and had become aware of his feelings, and so Ryuji then decided to just admit it. But when Makoto started apologizing to him, Ryuji got upset and apologized in turn. Ryuji eventually left Makoto feeling uncertain if they can still remain as friends or not. The next day, Makoto found out that Ryuji had skipped school. Feeling responsible and not wanting to lose Ryuji, Makoto searched for Ryuji and asked him to start going out with him. Ryuji eventually agreed, even though just minutes before he had already decided to distance himself from Makoto. What can we say? Teenagers are inherently fragile species. Meanwhile, back at school, Aoi was eating lunch with her friends when a teacher suddenly called out to her with news about her grandma. Just as Aoi was leaving school, Makoto had just gotten back. He felt embarrassed, but at the same time happy that he and Ryuji can now go back to being how they were before. Aoi was in a hurry, as she tried to call her father over the phone, although it went straight to voicemail. It seemed like it was a normal occurrence to Aoi, so she just resigned herself to leaving a voicemail instead. Fortunately, Aoi found out later that although Grandma did collapse, it wasn't anything serious. One good thing that resulted in this incident, however, is that Aoi's dad will actually go home. The next day, Aoi is back to her normal self and having lunch with her friends. Suddenly, an announcement was made by their teacher about a suspicious person roaming around the area, in which case they are advised to head straight home after school. Evening came and Aoi, taking a bath, was excited that her father would be arriving the following day. Suddenly, she saw a shadow pass by the window outside and remembered the teacher's warning about the suspicious person. Feeling scared and uncertain, Aoi wanted to call someone. She eventually decided to call Ryuji, who once told her that if ever something's bothering her, she can just tell him. Ryuji was in the middle of studying at that time and was surprised with her call. But when she said she's in trouble and needs help, he didn't hesitate to come running to her house even when he didn't even know the details. At this point, it doesn't really matter who. Ryuji has to end up with someone. He's the ideal boyfriend, isn't he? To Ryuji's surprise, however, everything seems to be fine, and Aoi was acting as she normally would. Although he soon realized that it was just a front and decided to stay with her for the night. Not long after, they heard someone trying to open the front door and decided to hide in the closet. They said someone eventually got inside the house and found them. Turned out it was actually Aoi's father, who had managed to get an earlier flight back home. After things got cleared up, Ryuji went home for the night, and the father-daughter duo spent time together waiting for the sunset and eating breakfast together like they used to. Although it seems like her dad has to go back to work by the end of the year, Aoi is just happy that they will actually be spending Christmas. By lunchtime at school later that day, Makoto was telling Ryuji that the suspicious person from yesterday was caught near Aoi's house and wondered if she and her grandma were all right. Ryuji then fills him in on what happened to Aoi's grandma and about her father's arrival. Hearing this, Makoto started feeling uncomfortable, seeing as even now Ryuji and Aoi are communicating just fine. Oh, could this be jealousy? But with who exactly? Anyways, by the end of lunch period, Ryuji shyly asks Makoto if he would like to spend Christmas Eve together with him, to which Makoto also shyly said yes to. On Makoto's way home from school, he saw an ad about an event for couples during Christmas Eve. He blushed as he wondered if Ryuji also wanted to kiss him. When Makoto asked him about it the next day, Ryuji got flustered, but eventually admitted that he did want to kiss Makoto. Ryuji, however, knows that Makoto's feelings for him aren't as strong as his. And so Ryuji told Makoto that just being together is already enough for him, at least for now. As the Christmas holidays draw near, Ryuji and Makoto's plans for Christmas are being laid down. Ryuji, however, still has some doubts about Makoto's feelings for him and was having second thoughts about their current relationship. Meanwhile, Makoto was trying to look for a gift for Ryuji, although he just ended up browsing cute stuff online. That is until he came upon a coin purse with whale designs and ended up thinking about Aoi. Speaking of Aoi, she was preparing to go to school when her father suddenly dropped the bomb on her. Turns out he has to go back to work immediately, which means he won't be able to spend Christmas with her. With a smile on her face, Aoi assured her father that it was fine and that she just so happens to have been invited by her friend to spend Christmas together. Once again, it was all just a front, and deep inside, Aoi is actually hurting. Christmas holidays should be spent with families and loved ones. You think so too, right? Let us know what your thoughts are, and please like and subscribe if you still haven't. Let's find out what will happen to the trio's Christmas holidays in our next video. Until then, bye-bye.